I've had the privilege of getting to teach Julia for 3 years now, and practically every semester, 2 classes each semester. And this has kind of been a culmination of work that she's been doing for quite some time. And I'm excited for you guys to get to hear it. She's going to be doing a distinction on Commedia Dell Arte, which is called Unmasking Commedia Dell Arte.
Thank you so much. I love applause. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to my distinction. Today we'll be talking about Unmasking Commedia Dell Arte. Theater has always been a crutch for me. It has been there for me in my lowest of times. It's been here for me in my highest of times. I remember I was in 3rd grade doing storytelling competitions, figuring out the ins and outs of Goldilocks and the 3 bullfrogs, not the 3 bears. And I found myself falling in love with the form of storytelling. Theater was exploring someone else's feelings and emotions through my lens. And it truly helped me find myself. Playing other people helped me find how I would react in scenarios. And LSMSA showed me what a theater technique is. It let me deep dive into characters. It let me deep dive into an acting process. And let me explore other forms of theater. That's how I found myself in my junior year, going to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette's guest artist speaker with Giovanni Simonis on a workshop called Commedia Dell Arte. I had no idea what it was. I understood that it was a masked theater technique, and I understood that it was very, very Italian, if you couldn't tell. But I didn't know the archetypes or the history behind it. I just went in blindly, and I'm so glad I did. During this, I was in the Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, where we were clowns. Now, how does clowning come into this? Well, Commedia Dell Arte is the beginnings of physical theater and physical comedy, so slapstick comedies, things like Charlie Chaplin, Miss Kane. So the origins of clowning and the origins of Commedia Dell Arte meet at a peak, and I found myself loving political commentary and social commentary through the lens of theater and through the lens of comedy, and that's how this beautiful, beautiful distinction came to be. So let's get into it, shall we? What is Commedia Dell Arte? Commedia Dell Arte is a partially masked and partially improvised theater technique that emerged in 16th century Italy. What partially masked was is that some of the actors and some of the portrayals had masks while others didn't. All of them played archetypes and 2D flat characters that stressed physical exaggerations. If somebody was low level, you can tell their class size by where they're at on the floor. They were crouched. They showed exactly who they were within their masks and their archetypes. Partially improvised means that they had a set structure. If you take improv 1 and 2 here at LSMSA, you realize that you are making everything up on the spot. You're making up your character, you're making up what their motivation is, what their objective is for that scene in that moment. Commedia Dell'arte is a little different in that sense because these characters had set motivations, they had set needs, and they had set wants to get these needs. They also had set scene structures. So this would happen in this scene, this would happen in this scene, this would happen in this scene. It was improvised because it didn't have a script. No one was reading lines, there was no line call, it was in the moment. This allowed for differences between performances, and it allowed for structure without repetition. Traveling troupes use this to adapt to their audiences. If they found themselves having a pretty dead crowd that night, they'd add a little more jokes, they'd find something that hit, and kept on going with that audience. Commedia Dell Arte mixed high and low culture with pop culture, which it basically merged the two worlds. It allowed for peasants and high-class people to enjoy the same type of theater while making fun of each other in a lighthearted fashion. It did show raunchy gestures. Just a trigger warning here, I will be talking about cuckolding, cheating, drags, and things that were basically unheard of before in theater performance at this time. So, on that note, let's get into the history. Commedia Dell Arte was born from marketplace economies. It is important to note that Italy was deprived of different city-states. It was not a unified country with a unified language. This means that there was a lot of language barriers with a rise of bargaining. Extreme droughts and famine brought in immigrants from other places of Italy. So instead of within this language barrier, it's like somebody talking French and somebody talking Spanish. They might understand a few words because they share the Latin origins, but they're not going to fully understand each other. So they resorted to extreme gestures. What that caused is Commedia took these and just brought it way up, brought that amp up to 11. It portrayed basic needs, which became the birth of archetype. The church had a very large influence within Commedia Dell Arte. The precursor to it was passion plays. Passion plays were morality plays put on by the Catholic Church that taught you how to be a good person. It told you not to cheat. It told you what happens if you steal. It shows the morality of it all. It says, hey, you're gonna go to hell if you do this, and this. What Commedia Dell Arte did was flip that on its head. It showed immoral characters in immoral scenarios, bringing something just unheard of that brought audiences to it even more. It was the shock value of comedy that people were attracted to. The first documented Commedia Dell Arte troupe was in 1545. There was 8 men, and although it was known that Commedia Dell Arte was happening way before this, this was the first time that people were documented being paid as actors. This allowed them to make a living, and this allowed what acting is now. You see Broadway actors, you see community theaters. This is how it flourished. This is how traveling theater truly became, and it's paved the way for so many of us today. Now let's get into the performance of it all. Commedia Dell Arte highlights masking. So if you see here, there's 3 characters that are all masked. These show their archetypes. I have my own right here. Each archetype represents a different class structure and a different classical character. We'll get into who those are later on in the story. But it's important to note that these archetypes were 2D and didn't allow for a 3-dimensional character to flourish. They lived within the confines of their own mask. It's unlike modern theater where a villain can become a hero at the end of the story. No, he's set in his face. He's not going to change. The church support varied between these things because it was so openly raunchy. The idea of pornographic material was opposed because they basically took what was a sacred act of marriage and destroyed it. But people were more drawn to this because within these archetypes people found themselves. They found versions of servants that mimicked them, and they were laughing about it. People were enjoying who they are. And it was that feeling and that idea of I get to see a performance quite like the ones that were at churches without the guilt of I'm not giving 10% of my income right now and I'm not going to get sent into a war that I don't reflect. Now let's get into speech. Stock characters come from different places of the world, so their words become disheveled and gibberish. For the sake of my teachings, I just decided to teach straight gibberish. As we'll see in some videos right now, later on, you'll see that I can't teach the complexities of language. Some characters had derives of Spanish languages, while others had derives of straight Latin. It really just depended on who they were talking about, but at the end of the day, it did get very mixed and disheveled, becoming its own thing, becoming something even more. A lot is within these scenes, within these confines, there were comedic bits if the crowd was dialing down and just they were falling asleep. Let's say it was a matinee for old people. They were pre-planned where somebody would say a line or do a gesture, and other people would come in and perform this extreme acrobatic work. There were flips, tricks, ballet acts, acts that showed sword wielding, things like that, things that were extremely construed. People like Colombino would do a handstand on the chair of the person while they were sitting in it. Things just you wouldn't expect. They grab the audience's attention and rope them back into the scenes. And last thing I'm going to talk about clocking. Clocking is specific to Commedia Dell Arte because of the mask. A lot of these masks stressed a very long nose, and most of them didn't want to butt noses when talking to each other. So to move around in the space, they wouldn't go just like this. They would look to where they're going, and then turn their bodies. This allows for planes of communication. So two people on separate planes, as they're not facing each other, wouldn't be able to talk to each other until they would turn around and clock to each other. And then they would have a conversation. That makes sense to you guys? Perfect. Now get into what an archetype is. I know I've been bouncing that word around a couple times in this presentation, but as said before, Commedia Dell Arte doesn't allow for progression of characters. These set characters are set in their ways, which causes physical stereotypes. Low-level characters were on the ground, high-level characters were in the air. It was a representation of what they saw among them. Now, stereotyping is not a good thing, and I will not say it is a good thing. And it's hard to teach that it's hard to teach physical stock characters and this idea of comedy without acknowledging the fact that some of this was wrong. But as players, I think we have to recognize where it comes from. We have to recognize where this comedic origins come from so we can address it and we can find out, hey, let's not do this. This is not okay. Versus, okay, yeah, this is something that I can act upon. This is something that I see around me. Think of how like South Park is when they're making fun of everyone, not just a certain few. They weren't making fun of people because of their race, class, or gender. They were making fun of them because of their circumstances. And the actors within these scenarios were also going through the same circumstances as well. They were going through extreme poverty. They were running around. They were trying to show what political commentary was because they couldn't go to the power center. They protested in the only way they could, which was theater. Mastery of a character took between 10 to 15 years, and people played it for a lifetime. It sounds a little weird saying like, hey, you're only playing one guy for this long and you haven't mastered it, but simplicity is some of the hardest acting you can do. Because as actors, we want to become something more. We are three-dimensional beings. We have complex emotions. These characters do not. These archetypes do not. So facing the simplicity of it all can be really hard for these actors. They also had to learn new languages, new techniques. Those who were once rich who had fallen from their wealth were the ones that were wielding the sword because they had training in that already. It was really just a mix of what they saw. And now, let's get into the structure of what a Commedia Dell Arte performance is. What it's going to show is a video of the prologue, and I'll explain after how it differs from normal prologue that you'll see in, let's say, Romeo and Juliet.
Hello. My name is Isabel Gillett, and I'm from Commedia Design. Number 2.
outside of that. After the prologue was the exposition, it basically outlined, hey, here's our characters, here's our love interests, and here's the problem. And why was the problem caused? It was always designing. It was always designing. Act 1 introduces the conflict, then at the peak of conflict, there was an intermission, leaving the audience on a cliffhanger. Act 2 resumes after the intermission and just builds and builds upon this conflict. So if we remember like basic like reading laws where it's like exposition, build up, climax, solution. So imagine the climax as a mountain at this point because it's just messages keep getting misconstrued, things keep building upon another until we find a very simplistic solution at the end where we like without a moral. It's not, oh man, cheating is wrong. It's wow, this message was so convoluted and there's so many different things. So yes, and then it ends in an epilogue where everyone lives pretty much happily ever after. Let's get into what the archetypes are. At first we have the Zani family. The Zani family is expansive, but he's also seen as a singular stop character. If you see here, these are the two masks I didn't make, so bear with me. This is a first Zani and this is a second Zani. As we can see, they're pretty bird-like in structure, which goes into what their archetypes were. If you think of their behavior and physicalities, they always go back to some form of animal. A Zani is a mix of a pigeon, a monkey, and a dog. He pants like a dog because he needs water. His needs are not being fulfilled. He had a white hooked nose and his stance was low and he was carrying a sack of potatoes. He was like sat on the floor almost. So he could be crawling around, also to about this high of a level. I'm sorry, I'm in boots. His primal desires are also not being fulfilled at the same time. His lust is not being satiated. He's not having, so he's like lusting after women. He sits there, his pelvis is out to show that, almost in like a low C curve, like flattened. It's like an E without that. His name origin is Giovanni. That was because a lot of people from Veronese were coming into Venice due to family loss on their countryside in the 1500s to 1600s. This had the convoluted language, and it caused what I said before with the marketplace economy. They were just begging off the street. They had so many of them, and for some reason, most of their names were Giovanni. That got pressed and shortened. Hey, Sonny, you come here. They were the ones that interacted with the audience the most because they were the ones that most people related to. Many people saw themselves in the Zani character because they were struggling to meet their own needs. They were struggling to make ends meet. Two examples of Zani are Brigella and Arlecchino. Brigella and Arlecchino, I only have a Brigella mask. I'll tell you why I didn't decide to do Arlecchino later. Here is Brigella. He has a little syphilis symbol. That's the nature of Commedia Dell Arte. And he's the first Zani. He's still lower on the character hierarchy, but he can still boss a second Zani around. He's literate, for one, and he's the owner of a store or an inn, usually an inn. He's conniving and willing to do anything to meet his needs. He's the one in the green mask. The green mask is supposed to signify hospitality. So it's supposed to show like, hey, come into my inn, welcome, welcome, I am kind, benevolent. But it kind of throws you off, doesn't it? His almond-shaped eyes and that weird smirk on him. It creates tension within the audience. Progressively, Brigella gets more conniving and evil, and it shows his true colors. The origins of his name are Brigella Cavici. Brega means trouble, Attica Brega means pick a fight. Cavicio means quibble, which was his ability to solve problems. As pictured, he's wearing a white coat, trousers, and with a green braid on the side. intelligent than Brigella, but that won't stop him from trying to read. So this results in a lot of mixed messages, where it's like, oh, this is what it says. It says that so-and-so hates you so much and they never want to see you again. Which really is just a love letter. In the Zani pecking order, he's at the bottom. He's usually the servant to Pantalone, Dottore, or Capitano. He's a lustful character and usually the love interest of a feminine lover, or the servant character of Colombina, which is on my next slide. His name comes from a water bird, which was Harley. It had irregular patches on him, quite like the patches you'll see on his vest there. The Ino derives from Henitino, which means little devil. His movement is a lot lighter than most Zani's, so instead of being so beat down on the floor, he's raised up a lot until his knees will come back into his chest, although he's still low. That is influenced from French ballet. His clothing is sometimes pitch black or has patchwork, and he speaks a Burgundy dialect, which sounded like horse and hocking. He carried a bat, which was usually signified as a phallic thing. He used a bat in the waist. I think y'all can infer, y'all are smart. Now we're ready for Colombina, the female Zani. She was the first Zani, so she was a mid to low, but she was an educated feminine character. There are two versions portrayed of her. The older one was bossy, and the younger one was pretty. She was nice. She was a nice face to look at. There's a reason she's unmasked, because Commedia Dell Arte was the first time a woman was on stage, not being portrayed by a man. So Commedia Dell Arte, in a way of roping in their audience, showed how beautiful their women were, as a way of grasping people, bringing people in. She's the only character who can fuss at someone above her class. So she can both fuss at people below her as the Zanis, as second Zanis or lower class, but she can fuss at the Becky, which is introduced now. Pantalone and Dottore. These are just two old men. Both are mid-level characters. Pantalone is in red with the Turkish yellow shoes. He's a greedy, crazy old man who's extremely money hungry. He's top of the totem pole in terms of wealth, but all he wants to do is acquire more and more of it. Think of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, where he just says, yes, my plan, my schemes. He's Zani's master and usually seen as fully masked with a big perky beard. Right here I have an example of a different type of Pantalone. This is Pantalone's Cupido. They vary by Commedia troupe. As you can see, it has a large, accentuated nose and bigger eyes. Pantalone range from about 100 to 150 years old, just showing how decrepit he is. And he wore a phallic codpiece that ranged from about the mid-level to up here above the waist. This showed how lustful he was, and is usually described as a cuckold. Dottore and him fit in a physical sense. As you can see, he forms like a C shape, while Dottore has a D shape. And as quoted by Darbo, he is the Beelzebub of sex. He trots like a rooster, and reports of the time suggest that his voice sounded like a dying chicken. Dottore's origins are unknown, but he is Bolognese, which is where the first college and spaghetti lasagna and spaghetti were created. So, if you ever wonder why he's so pompous, rotund, big, he wore black academic regalia that showed how educated he was, yet in scenarios where he had to problem solve, it was dumb. This is an example of a Dottore mask. Unlike the others, it's not like a full half mask. It stops here at the nose. This allows some of them to have like hair at the bottom, like bushy eyebrows coming out. So yes, I think that the roundness and just like pompous of his nose also suggests like he's just very vigor in nature. He spoke Latin in hopes of showing his intelligence. This character went into Moliere's plays, which I will get into later. Now let's focus on Capitano and Magnifico. Capitano stripes. He's in the yellow and red. He was a coward and the only two-faced mask. As I like to say, the longer the nose, the shorter the sword. Capitano was all bark, no violence. This is him here. He represented Spanish conquistadors. So he would sit there and be like, yes, look at all my money, all my wealth. I was the greatest general you've ever seen. And then he'd see a mouse and he'd run away. So he usually had a very large feather, but his center of gravity is higher than Zani. He's in between the Veki and the Zani because he's treated with a class of the Veki, meaning that it's treated like he does have power, but truly he has none. And now let's get into who Magnifico was. Magnifico was the godlike character. This is him here. He had sharp, defined features. He was stoic. He was rarely represented in Commedia Dell Arte, but was an earlier version of some of the Commedia Dell Arte archetypes. He sat here with a vampiric haste and took up a stage presence. He was also seen as magic. When Magnifico dies, another one takes his place. He's also seen as the father of Pantalone. While Pantalone represents the marketplace people and those at the highest battling pole, Magnifico represents the man behind the curtain, political elite. And lastly, we have our lover slash Mardale. There's always two characters. Right here, the female without a mask is the feminine lover. This is her father, Pantalone, and then Brigetta is in the background. Lover girl, she was a lover girl. She had heavy makeup and wigs, but she was maskless because she was a woman, and people wanted to see hot women. But also the masklessness made you root for them more. It was the closest thing that you could see to yourself in a commedia production, but they were fixed stereotypes, which means that they were two-dimensional. They had no room for growth nor progression. They did wear masks sometimes, which were wizards or loops. It's that, see that Mardi Gras-esque mask, or there's one with veils over it. These are not considered Commedia Dell Arte masks because they were emotionless and covered most of the face. The lovers stay connected with each other on releve, so that means that if you see my heels, I'm on the balls of my feet. They stayed unstable, so they were sitting there to represent the instability of their actions. Commedia Dell Arte's impact. As you're kind of hearing this, you're seeing these archetypes, you might think of some characters. I mentioned some before already, but I would say that Moliere's French farces and Shakespeare's works are some of the best examples of Commedia Dell Arte representation. Moliere worked with Commedia Dell Arte actors and worked in the same theater as a Commedia Dell Arte troupe in his early years. So he took these archetypes that were based in Italian marketplace culture and put them into high culture. So he took Fattore and turned him into a skinnier man that spoke Latin. If any of y'all watched Learned Ladies at NSU, that was a perfect representation of what Moliere's inspiration. They had this man who sat there. He had very big, loud makeup with a white face and cheeks, flamboyant shoes, and he talked about how much Latin he knew and how well his poems are, how well versed he is. But really, was he really a man? So Moliere took these characters and made them well-rounded, while also making them script. And then, kind of completing the same job as Commedia did, it talked about the hypocrisy of the political elite during the time. It served as political commentary, so they're both completing the same role. William Shakespeare took a lot of inspiration from Commedia Dell Arte. If any of y'all have watched A Midsummer Night's Dream, the character Puck is a classic example of Zani. There's actually a production of, there's a production of Midsummer painting the shrew that has all Commedia Dell Arte characters. It comes in, they're all dressed in the Italian fashion. The zombies have masks. And it just shows how much inspiration he took within these servant-like characters, within the types of comedy, because actors were familiar with this. These actors and Moliere's actors were familiar with Commedia Dell Arte and most likely worked as Commedia Dell Arte or knew someone in the realm that was an actor. In modern media, we see the Muppets. I truly think that the Muppets are one of the purest examples of Commedia Dell Arte we can find today that isn't a real thing. And I say that because if you think of the diva Miss Piggy, she sits there, she's loud, she's abrupt, she knows what she wants and she knows how to get it. And that is an exact example of how Palomino was in these theaters, in these archetypes. They also interact with people. Usually the lovers are human. So it shows like they're not outside of themselves. You look at a Muppet and you're like, that's a fully formed person with thoughts. You view them as a person. And that's what people thought of these archetypes. Because if I interact with a mask, it's two people talking. I bring the humanity into the piece, which is what some of these unmasked characters did. When you look at people like Gonzo, even looking at his nose, I mean, come on, it's a straight rip from Commedia. His love for danger and his want for applause, his need to appeasement, and his breaking of the fourth wall really existed throughout Commedia Dell Arte. I think Statler and Waldorf are great examples of L'attore and Pantalone. They bicker a lot, which shows that they're on the same plane. They are obviously a higher class than the players at hand. And just overall, looking at the shapes of their face, you'll see Pantalone throughout this man right here. You see that hook nose, that like drawn in cheeks, while this one that represents L'attore has a bigger, rounded nose, a fuller figure. Other examples of Commedia Dell Arte in modern media would be Bart Simpson from The Simpsons. He's a classic Zani, he's a trickster. His trickery and pranks push the plot along while also like stopping the main goal from happening. As I brought up, Mr. Burns is a classic example of Pantalone. And lastly, I have SNL. SNL does a great job at showing what people think of like political commentary at times. If you see how presidents are portrayed throughout SNL's history, you'll see it like, oh, this is what the people think of this president during this presidency. Oh, this is how the people thought he was doing it during this time. In a comedic lens. It was, again, fun, poking fun at the political elite, which is Commedia Dell Arte's main purpose. Now for the second part of my distinction, pedagogy. Pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. For 3 weeks, the second week until midterms, I taught acting free. I gave them the history, which was a more extensive version of what I just gave you now, and taught them each of the archetypes. Teaching was also getting them comfortable in the space, comfortable in performing something bigger than what a normal character was. So I did a lot of exercises that emphasized gibberish. I mean, we don't talk gibberish every day, so it was kind of hard to convey that in like classes. Also, I did physical body movements, so that was a lot of like, okay, you are a walrus. Now, what would a walrus look like if it was 75% walrus, 25% human? And then progressively got more and more human. How would you caricature the walrus? Is it a fat man? What is their knowledge scale? Things like that. So it helped people portray what their ideas of a stereotype and an archetype was, while still being a really fun movement. I know it sounds very like Mrs. Darby or classic theater teacher, but these things truly do help these actors become comfortable in their physicalities and comfortable in their bodies within performance. For this, I created masks. I had the base of the mask, which was a classic Greek full face mask, either with air dry or polymer clay. This one is air dry clay, this one is polymer clay. Polymer clay doesn't dry, so I could reuse it to create different sculptures. and then I would put a plaster of Paris and white glue mixture, forming a paper mache with the glue, with a shop towel. So that's how I got these guys here. I would basically make a hard cast, so I could drop this, work this around. It's easily cleanable because multiple faces will be on these things and have been on these things. So it allows for like that can be dropped automatically. That's sturdy. That can be used for multiple performances by multiple different people. It allows for characters and people to actually feel the spirit of the masks. I could have taught this without having these as a clutch, but truly I found that it added to the motivation of characters and it helped visualize who these people were. After I made the cast, I sanded them down and painted them. This allowed for them to feel comfortable within them. After having the actors try them on, I realized that I made the eye holes a little too small. Sometimes it would poke within like the bottom, like they're in your eye bags. So after I fixed them and like added more padding with paper mache, they were performable. So the overall idea of my lesson was that I wanted the students to be well versed within the history, relevance, and physical comedy of what Commedia Dell Arte was, and how it connects to modern day theater. The students learned how to perform their own Lazzi, they learned what each archetype was, and then for their final created a version of Frozen with Commedia Dell Arte archetypes. They turned Magnifico from Elsa. They had Hans as Capitano, Olaf and Sven were Zannies. It was overall a really fun experience to show like, hey, these are what these people were based off of. You see these people in modern day media, you see what they represent, and here's where they came from. So here's a clip of my final performance. It's showing it within tone, it's showing it within who the character is, body movement, saying, trying to tell a story, like, oh, that's shh, Elsa and her ice powers. Boom. One thing that I heard from many of these performers is that they realize that gibberish can be used as a language. You can always communicate with someone without having something in common with them. So having that need of like, hey, here's my physicality, and here's the tone I'm saying. Tone is everything in theater, and I feel like this goes back to the basicness of it all, while still being so big. Overall, I've learned so much, and I will be pursuing a degree in acting in college, and I'll be using this as a reference for my own comedic process with comedy and acting. It is always easier to perform something big and then hone it in, rather than having something small and then having to work it bigger. It was always a no, as I received many times here at my career at LSSN. I would use this to find myself and find better ways to act and find an outside in technique. If I realize, hey, this character reminds me a lot of Zani, who's lower, who's gonna have a hunch. It helps me develop physical characteristics, things that they might do, ways that they might speak, and truly find a better, well-rounded character. My hopes is that I will become a theater teacher when I grow up. So this was me testing the waters. I would like to teach on the college level, and this has helped me learn all the jargons, and has helped me realize that every student has their own IEP within theater and within most subjects, whereas like everyone learns differently. Some of us learn through physical repetition, some of us learn through verbal cues, and it's finding what works for everyone and finding, hey, let's have a rest day. Nobody is like willing to crawl on the ground today and make a fool of themselves. So let's just have a lecture day. It's finding out what fits the students and how to make them feel most comfortable in their own process. This has also helped me a ton in my directing process. As some of you might know, I did a directing capstone earlier in the year. I realized that I could use some of the same things and same language that I read in my books, in my acting books, in my technique books, within the students and help them learn, help myself convey things to them. I will also be teaching this in South Louisiana and Christian Youth Theater as a summer camp. So as part of my Golden Award for Girl Scouts, yes, I am very excited. I'll be teaching either like a one-week class or a one-day class for middle school to high school students, showing them just the basics of Commedia Dell Arte and letting them dip their toes in some fun little comedy. A huge thank you to Terrio for the continuous support and help throughout this process. I am the first theater distinction that he's ever had and that I know of. So this was a really hard thing to navigate, and I appreciate the communication he's had with Dr. J, the communication he's had with higher ups to help me make this dream attainable. Also to Dr. Allen and Dr. Stevens for the amazing, wonderful comments on my distinction. They were wonderful throughout this process, always giving stuff that will only help me progress. A huge thank you to Dr. J and Dr. Wakefer for their support of all 3 years of my LSM career, and especially throughout the Excel process. My dad, my wisdom for not only supporting and encouraging me, but also helping me in the creation of these beautiful, beautiful masks. Sometimes I would do the left-hand side and he would do the right-hand side because I'm left-handed and he's right-handed. So it was me like trying to find the curves and crevices of these people, of these masks. A huge thank you to Kendall Eastman Stewart, Isabel Gillett, Evie Bremer, and Liz Perez, and Claire Adair for being my test dummies. It was truly a great process, and thank you all for being my first class that I've ever taught. And a huge round of applause and thank you to Mary Schrader, my lock-in buddy and best friend, who every time I said, I want to stop this distinction, I'm tired, I'm so tired, I'm tired of theater, she would brace me up and say, hey, you worked so hard on this, don't let it go to waste. So thank y'all all, and thank you for all the attendance. Do we have any questions? Yes?
Did you hold up one of the line apps on the very,
Oh, Commedia? Yes. This is a rendition of Commedia. She was not a masked character, as I said before, but modern interpretations have her as a masked character because people are no longer like, oh my gosh, there's a woman on stage, I have to look at her. I truly love like her design and her character. So like y'all can like touch them and come up here and like feel the texture. She has like spirals. She was one of my favorites to paint because it was like I get to do makeup on her. Yes.
what's your favorite archetype?
Okay, I think my favorite archetype has to be Cactano, just because he's so loud and abrupt. I'm gonna demonstrate his walk just because I think it's so funny. He sits there and he's like dancing. So he's making this wide stance and he's not going anywhere. So I think he's my favorite to portray, he's my favorite to act out. I also just really like carrying a giant sword with me.
store. Do you know, like, where that comes from? Like, were people, like, mocking these stores? Like, did they have a bad perception of that?
Well, they were taking a lot of people's land, man. Yeah, so basically, Italy and Spain don't have the best relationship with each other. So, Spanish people try to come in, take Italy's land. They might have like caused and reason droughts. They just have like red vest relationships. It's kind of like, you know how sports teams mock each other? That's kind of how I think of it now, just on a more worldwide level of conquering land and people. Yes? Yes.
What surprised you most about teaching?
I have my students throw with me. I wasn't expecting them to be so willing. Truly, like, when I came into this project, I realized that I'm their peer. At the end of the day, they see me in the dorms. They know me on a very, very personal level. I mean, I've known this girl for 3 years. So it's weird that I am now like her teacher in a way. But they truly took instructions very well, and they asked some meaningful questions. They all came in with a willingness to work, which was a very delightful surprise, because I thought it would be more like, oh, you're my friend and I'm not going to take this seriously because of that. It's also an acting class, so it's like, if I don't make you memorize the lines, then what's the end result? But I saw them practicing, I saw them asking me questions in and outside of the classroom, and I truly appreciate it. Mary Straker.
Okay, hold on. Serious question. I promise I'm not making fun of it.
Yeah.
But, wait. Were people not allowed to play certain characters based on their height? Because, like, there's levels. I'm genuinely curious.
There is levels. I would say yes. I would, like, as a like in a casting sense, most likely. I don't have a definitive answer to give you, but it makes sense that a Capitano couldn't be played by like somebody my height, or like a Magnifico couldn't be played by someone my height, because they're supposed to be this high status character. It would almost take their power away from being short. Truly, I think me and Annalise both really like playing Capitano. It's such a big movements. Sorry to call you out, but it's such a big movements and such playing something like outside and taking up space, which you usually don't get to do. Madeline? Oh,
Okay, so like in the 15 or 16 years,
16, yes.
when it started, was this like a high-paying job? Like what class was it?
Has acting ever been a high-paying job? It's really dependent on the troupe and the church's support. So the church did support some actions of Commedia Dell Arte, just the ones that were a little more PG and supported their messages. So those troops, it was actually a nice career to have. It was nice to get into. But no, usually the people and players of Commedia Dell Arte were struggling actors. They would either fall in royalty or servants off the bat, who came in and bargained for money. They performed, and they traveled because it was just a way of begging. Do you have another
I was
question?
just having a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So like because of that, were they like not respected in society?
I think they were not very respected, no. They were seen as funny. It's like seeing like a comedian. It's not like a doctor, or someone of that respect, with a PhD, but it was seen as like, hey, I can recognize your hard work, and I realize that what you do is hard, and you're living your dream. So, yes.
Do you know if there's any, like, renditions of it that, like, people still, like, play?
As in archetypes, or just Commedia Dell Arte in general?
Like, just, like, the mass archetypes in general, but also...
Commedia Dell Arte, there is one play called Servant of Two Masters, which is a Commedia Dell Arte-like work. It has a set script, but it has bigger and broader movement. Thank you.
So I have two questions. First off, does like color theory play any part in like the coloration of the masks?
Color theory, as in like how colors make you feel, or like this? Yes. So Miguel has a weird slimy look to him. It's like green for both hospitality and it makes you feel unsettled and slimy. The reason I didn't make Arlecchino was because he was just like straight, like it was painted on black basically, and I didn't want to teach that to the students. I found that that wasn't my place, and though I don't know the full like if that contributed to blackface in American culture or current culture, I didn't want to portray like anybody with just a straight blackface on the ground. It didn't feel right with me, it didn't set right with me. So I would say yes, because it did portray like it had diversity characters, who were usually the servants, and because they were always in the sun all day, not because of the race. So yeah, go.
I also want to ask, was any of this like carried over to the colonies like Mexico?
I know that it carried over to places like Japan, within like no theater, because they had masks that represented different people. Mask theater has always been a technique and stemmed from the Greeks, so I wouldn't be surprised if there is in Mexican theater. I just don't know that, but it's a good thing to research. I'll look into it. Thank you. Aubrey?
Where is like
Ireland?
irony? Sorry. Irony. Like Mary Sharer asked about how like typically like now it doesn't so much matter if someone's like taller or if they're playing like a powerful position. So like how would like irony?
Irony could come into play with just like the idea of Commedia Dell Arte and Archetypes. The irony came from like where players talking about how bad the world is and we're in the world that is bad. It's more of like, hey, I'm an example of what's happening around us. Let's laugh at our troubles. Yes.
Is there an archetype that inspired your performance in your art now?
This is a great question that I actually thought about. Commedia Dell Arte had got me thinking about what archetype would we portray. Urinetown is a perfect example of what Commedia Dell Arte is, especially with like Bobby and Hope, which were the lovers. I personally think that Gladwell is a Catalone, only because he's money hungry and powerful. Also, his daughter is Hope, which was usually the type of love that was. So, yeah.
Can you use this for like dramas too, or is it mostly like applicable to romances and comedies? Like, could you do this for like Hamlet besides just Midsummer's Night Dream?
Yes, you can do it within Hamlet. The players in Hamlet are a great example of Commedia Dell Arte characters. It is said that Othello was also, like some characters in Othello was also inspired by Commedia Dell Arte characters. The issue at hand with that is that drama is very well rounded, so it wouldn't exactly be like exact Commedia Dell Arte. It can take inspiration. So some of these like survey characters in a drama are great examples of what a survey character would be in Commedia.
Did this go for Mumming and Robert's Plays? Anyone?
No,
Okay.
no, I think Homer's Plays came after.
I think Robert's Play or
Mumming? Were they
12th century.
Oh, 12th century? Not that I know of. The origins of Commedia Dell Arte came from Greek theater. So I know that Commedia Dell Arte did inspire restoration plays in the 17th century in England. Mummers Plays, I might have taken inspiration, but none that I know of.
Can you clarify what Robert's Plays are?
Can you clarify what you're saying?
It's very similar to this, or it was like a mass improv thing where people would go door to door and do little performances for like goods, but
from South Louisiana and immersed with Mardi Gras. Another reason I fell in love with the masks, because it felt like home, in a sense. So, in that note, Commedia Dell Arte made its way to France fairly quickly, and France and Italy shared a lot of their comedic origins. When looking at the masks here, I mean, that would compare that to Mardi Gras, and even as I was like looking at the parades this year, I was like, that's a Brigella, that's a Sani mask, oh my gosh, it's the wrong color, and it's like, I was just nitpicking. And also that idea of just like being wildly loud and proud about being non-affluent, I think, is another thing that Cajuns do very well, and that can be inspired by Commedia Dell Arte. I would say like it came from French, and then like not specific to the Cajun, but French heritage, and then turned into Cajun heritage. Is that all our questions? Any more? Well, that's